Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here for another Product Growth Leaders topic of the week. This week, we're going to be talking about listening posts for market insight. We actually had on one of the calls a while back, one of the people talk about listening posts and establishing listening posts. And Steve and I thought it was a really good idea. And Steve's the one who actually suggested this week we do listening posts. What's your take, Steve? I mean, it seems like the market listening posts for market insight and anything getting market insight seems to be a place where companies are struggling.
Well, yeah, I think it is. In a number of ways, I think that there's, I've always, I've always been rather amused that marketing goes to so much energy to try and get people to connect with salespeople. And yet customers are delighted to connect with customer support and customer success people. And we try to get them off the phone as quick as possible. Right? But I'm talking to a client right now who listens, their only listening post is the sales team. And well, they're simply not getting the information they need. uh, they're on so many levels. I mean, one is the sales guy is saying client X will buy if we give them this feature. And the product manager is saying, well, what is the feature? What problems does it solve? And he goes, I don't know. It solves the problem of the client will buy if we give them this feature. And yet, so I guess the bottom line is, in this particular client case, they're listening only to sales, and I would say that sales is a valid listening post, but it's only one of many. There are so many people engaging with customers in different ways that we need to embrace them all, and then, forgive me for ranting, not only embrace them all, but also supplement them with personal experience with real people who buy and use our products.
I couldn't agree more. And Steve, I think at least a third, if not half of this is about you ranting, right? Isn't this a forum just for Steve to rant? And we try to set these things up to get Steve to rant. So I agree with you. We have got a great panel with us. It's our most international panel. We've got May Wong and Marco Tillmann, both non-U.S. people. May's, just by miles, right, into Canada, but still, it's 50% representative outside the United States on this call this week.
We use kilometers here.
Yeah, exactly, right. They use the metric system. And Marco Tillmann, obviously, in Europe and Germany. So we're looking forward to this conversation. And on Monday, we put this question into the community. What listening posts do you use to ensure you stay on top of your market? And the first few sets of answers were very secondary research oriented. And I hadn't even thought about the secondary research, although I think secondary research can be a great source for these. But May came in, and as May tends to do, had another thesis. So May said, as a product ops person on a relatively new product team, one of my most pressing challenges is to create standard channels of communication for both internal and external stakeholders. And I'm going to leave it at that and let you sort of take over with your thesis.
So when you join a new company, right, as a product focused person, you want to know everything. So you start talking to everyone and you build these personal relationships, and that's how you get all of your information, right? But that's not scalable. Once you have a product team of 10, if you have 10 product managers going to the same, person who is going to feed you all the information, then that person suddenly have 10 times the number of meetings. And also you scale that by the 60 people you need to talk to get a full picture, then your PMs don't have time to do anything else except learn or just anything else in general.
Right.
So what is the best way to, and I talk about this with my research team quite a bit, it's like, what is the best way to democratize information, right? How do we make it public? How do we make it accessible, not just to designers or PMs, but also to anyone else who builds products to solve problems? How do we get people to give us insight and to have other people chime in on their relevant experiences. Has we exist in an org that's much bigger than us, that uses products outside our current product scope. Like we have a lot of third-party co-petition that we also implement. So we co-petition is one of my favorite words. So we get their feedbacks, right? So someone put in. So we have 2 Slack channels for each of our major segments, and we ask people to put, things that they see in the field in those channels. And oftentimes one person posts something and 20 other people chime in on what they see and the different nuances and the different subsegments of that area. And it's really interesting to get that context. And then overall, like, everyone learns a bit from this. You consume it at your own pace. We can send those insights onto whatever insights tracker you use. We use Product Board. And overall, I think it's been a very interesting experience to see this transformation from like one-to-one conversations to a much broader scope. And also just forcing all of those private conversations into public has been a very transparent process, actually. I think people like it a lot more, even though it requires a lot more vulnerability. And I think we're a better organization for it.
Well, but as we've learned from Brene Brown, vulnerability is actually good, right?
It's hard,
it allows you to. It is hard. And 2 things you said really stuck out to me. One, I love the idea of the democratization of insight or knowledge and that type of stuff. And it sort of pairs well. When I talk about strategy stuff, and I think we've talked on this call, I like the idea of pushing decisions out to the edge, right? Atomizing decisions. And if we have good, clean, clear strategy that we share and communicate in boundaries, and then we enable people to make decisions closer to the point of the decision being made instead of bringing them up. I always talk about that's a great way to atomize, right? Make decisions, enable people to do it. But if they don't have that democratized insight and information, right? Those 2 things together, I think, become almost the foundation you need, right? You need ubiquitous or access to the insight, and you need clearly defined and aligned strategy that enables people to make decisions when they need to make decisions. I think those 2 together come together great. So
yeah, I want to add one more little piece of expansion. By doing this, whenever people post what is typically a feature request, now we have people in the field asking, well, what is the problem here? We don't even have to drive that anymore. It is fascinating to see
That is
across
great.
the board.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful, and I'll talk about something similar to that in a second. The other thing that stood out to me, when I was at GE, we used to do these things called the Quick Market Intelligence, QMI calls. We use them for competitive, like, salespeople facing competitors, and what are the landmines they're laying, so we can respond to them and lay new landmines or whatever it may be. It was very tactical. But I love the idea of doing a similar type of stuff, and then your forums seem to be doing that for you for more of the market insight, not just the tactical stuff. And I think on both of those sides, here. I love, glad to see this type of stuff happening at a place. Marco, did you answer this question?
I did actually. And as usual, I say all of the above, right?
Well, on the poll, that was on the poll. This was the Monday question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of everything indeed. Part of the problem really is trying to get the insight from all of these different sides. And to May's point as well, and I think a good analogy is the product manager being in the middle of that spider net, and all these strings converge on the product manager. You're trying to process and filter all that information. And while this ubiquity of information is great, and is definitely something we need to strive for as product managers, well, or as employees in general. The real issue I also see is, again, processing and filtering that information. because otherwise you're going to be spending pretty much most of your time just sorting through all of this, this flood of information and trying to make the most sense out of it. So one thing that definitely needs to happen as well is processes and pipelines that help you scale that. Now, this is not just the pragmatic German speaking here. I mean, this is just the fact that you only have so many hours in a day. And even if you refer back to, let's say, Marty Kagan, who says, as a product manager, 4 hours of your day should be dedicated to doing product management stuff. Now, that's a lot of time if you're doing all this other stuff as well, such as speaking to the customers and reading up on market trends and competitive information, doing research, primary or secondary. And that's going to be really, really hard to do in a normal day's hours, basically. So what does need to happen definitely is schooling of the employees to make sure that information isn't just dumped on the product manager.
Curated.
It's curated, absolutely. And that this information is also retained. I mean, you can only learn from these experiences if they're documented and you do your retrospectives. You basically go back and think about what could have been done better and how you'll improve next time around instead of going through the same mistakes over and over again. And the same goes for information. I definitely want to have May's salespeople. The fact that they're asking these questions already from the get-go is fantastic and something I don't see in a lot of organizations.
It takes a lot of training.
I bet.
So, but
And
once you
motivation,
start
right?
doing it, when people ask for features and you say, "Can you give us a bit more background about the problem?" Now, when people read that, people start doing it on their own.
Exactly. Well, also if they get something out of it, right? I mean, there needs to be some kind of motivation behind it. Otherwise, they're not just doing it for shits and giggles. It's something that makes their job easier. It turns around much more quickly. I did notice that too. I've seen salespeople pull engineers into meetings simply because that instant gratification of having an engineer commit a feature to a customer. Now, that's a big no-no. But why do they do that? Because they learn from experience that that's the quickest way to get to to that result. Even though in the end it's not sustainable, because most likely somebody else, product manager or whoever, decides that maybe that feature isn't the most important one. So we need to work on other ones. And then, of course, what happens is you start breaking promises.
Yeah, but Marco, the real issue there is not the product manager. The issue is that engineer went and talked to 30 customers.
Exactly.
And told all 30 of them that their thing was the number one thing. Precisely. And all of them exceed our development resource for the next 6 months.
That's absolutely true. So yeah, the product manager should to some degree be the gatekeeper of the information, right? All that product related stuff comes in, product manager processes it, and of course applies it to the planning and the vision and the mission and objectives and so forth. But at the same time too, the thing that can backfire in that case is the fact that the product manager at some point is overloaded.
Mm-hmm. So that's at some points.
Yeah, good point.
At all points, right?
Wishful thinking, right? But that's exactly the issue. So I know product managers tend to want to solve everything themselves very often because it's not a job or a job description that's so clearly defined that you can say, this is no longer my job. Or rather, well, everything should be a job. This is something where I can employ the help of somebody else, the rest of the team. And this is a huge issue I see over and over again, and I'm guilty of it myself. So you need to be able to also delegate these kind of processes. Say information comes in, maybe I can get the help from somebody else to curate that information and give me the most key messages behind it, right? So that.
But who do you trust to curate it better than the product manager themselves?
Yeah, we can't clone ourselves, can we?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I did have the experience of sitting with my customer support team, and they say, we've got 40 or 50 or 100 or 100,000 trouble tickets here, and they said, would it help you if we distilled them down to the top 10 that were driving us the most crazy. And I'm like, oh, absolutely. And so I started getting monthly reports from support saying, here are the top 10 hitters. And a lot of them were, stupid simple. And some of them were, granted, some of them were big too, but a lot of them you're like, oh, we misspelled something on a report and it's irritating to people. Yeah. That's an easy fix. But rather than what another company I worked with, the product manager was saying that he was wandering through the support trouble tickets looking for stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm agreeing now with Marco here. If customer support can get their team together and say, if we could get 1 thing, 5 things, 10 things from product management in the next 90 days, what would it be? Then I think they will do a good job of curating. The thing is that they all work together with a similar objective, whereas salespeople do not.
So it's interesting you go there, and I'm going to go a little tangential here. This may be a place where AI ML comes in and helps, because you could use that to start batching these things, reading the open text stuff and saying, oh, this is about this feature or this need or whatever it is. And that may be a way to classify it. Or everybody's talking about what's the path to get into product management. Perhaps teaching customer support how to affinity map these things and do that type of, is sort of, apprenticeship for product management. And you can teach them how to do that. So with that example in mind, I'm going to walk back what I said to Marco about who should do it other than product management, because maybe in that situation it would be a good case. Not sure sales would be the right people to do that. Steve always talks about there's 2 mindsets or 2 lenses, N equals many and N equals 1. And, sales is N equals 1, and they're going to have a hard time doing the affinity mapping. Customer support is N equals 1, but they're sort of like a sales engineer in this hybrid role where they need to do sort of be, purple squirrel, right? A little bit of both. I could see that. I was going to also...
They're only talking to the complainers. I mean, they cannot be your only source.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you have no insight from people who are saying, I love this thing. It works perfect for me. I don't have any problems. And how many of us ever called Microsoft to complain about Gantt charts in Microsoft Project? We just suffered it and moved on and looked for something else.
There was a statistic that I took way long ago in business school where they talked about it's less than 5%. It's like 1% of your customers are ever going to complain, and most people are just going to either leave your product or something else. And so you wanted to find a way to get more people talking to you. So to your point, it is very small, but it's a good listening point, and it's probably the one that's closest to, and we'll get to the poll in a second. Marco, you said one more thing that just keeps eating at me, with Marty saying spend 4 hours a day or doing product management stuff. I would say that you should product managers should only spend their time doing product management stuff. Because if they're not doing product management stuff, what are they doing? They're doing other people's jobs.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is other stuff as well. Sometimes you need to get out of your boundaries, right? I mean, it's how you define product management stuff. If doing product management stuff also involves talking to customers, going to trade shows, trying out competitive products and offerings and so forth, then absolutely right. Then that's all you should be doing. Apart from the planning and
I would at least
mediation.
I would argue that going and talking to customers, whether it's at a trade show or on Zoom or at their place of business, is one of the critical, baseline product management things. So I won't dig into that. The interesting thing that some of this conversation brought me up, our friend Paul Hotalo, who's been a panelist in this, is taking our product strategy course with us. And this week we were talking about engaging with the market to understand and validate your strategy, right? How you need to do it. And he did the homework assignment, which was to put a market engagement plan. What's the reason to engage? Who are you going to engage? And what are you trying to learn? He actually added to it. And they've got a big trade show next week. He took the template and made it his branding colors, but he actually is briefing all the people going to the trade show who are going to be in the booth. Here's what we're trying to learn. Here's the questions you need to ask. And I'm like, talk about leveraging listening posts, right? He took this whole thing and moved it into, he's proactively going out, not just to get what they know, but helping them figure out what he's trying to learn and what he's trying to validate so they can do this while they're doing it. And at the same point, he gave them, what do we want you to convey? As you're talking to people, here's also some key things to convey about this regulation or this product or whatever it is. And it became what a nice, let's flip it. Instead of being reactive to those listening posts, let's be proactive and start enabling them to do it. I thought that was he got my A+, check mark for the week in the class. But I would recommend people, let's do that. Let's not just gather the information people are giving. Let's help them understand the type of stuff we're trying to learn. And I think, May, you did that as well when you teaching them how to ask what's the problem this is solving is starting to shift that from reactive to proactive.
It was not intentional. It was a happy little accident.
That's not what you say moving forward. You tell the story in 10 years and it's I thought this was a great idea and I asked them to do this and I taught them and it was great. So,
and next week that will be in my seminar when I explain my friend May proactively did this, and you can too.
Yes, exactly. Well, let's go to the poll. Unless there's any other last thoughts, I know we don't have Paul here to do the last.
One quick comment that goes to teaching, right? Which I believe is also a job of a product manager. Share your knowledge. And same thing there, like you teach them at the trade show what are questions to ask and what's important, or how to filter and curate the information, or teach them other methods. Like recently in my organization, I taught people how to use the Rice and Kano method to do prioritization, because
I could use you to teach me the Kano method too, because that's not an easy one.
It's not, but it's pretty interesting. I mean, at least from an identification point of view, you don't need to do surveys, but once you look at things in these 4 categories, they start making more sense.
No, I know a lot of people who are big on that. I was just joking with you, Marco.
I want to point out a word that you've been using, which is the word curate.
Mm-hmm.
And we never really had to think about this until like we purchased product board for road mapping, or like might as well use this insights tool. And now we have to think about, how do we curate information and connect it to the things that we are building? And going through that thought process has been actually really interesting, because like talking to the people in research, and they say, well, we have these big deep dive research projects. How do we connect that information in, and how do we connect all of the information from the different sources? And in a sense, like the way we're thinking about doing this, it turns the product managers more into information curators and facilitating, so that our partners who actually do the solutioning understand the full problem. So it's a very interesting it's been a very interesting couple months getting to this relative conclusion, but also like we're curating the information to justify our product decisions and prioritization. So
no, actually, exactly where I was going to go was, product managers are helping gather this insight and curate it, because there's so much data points out there that if you don't curate it, it's like, water everywhere, not a drop, or insight everywhere, not a drop to drink. You can't separate the frequency for the noise. But we use it to make our decisions on the product, what to do, what's the right thing to do, how to prioritize these things. But then we enable the rest of the organization to use that insight to do their jobs and make their decisions. And it's such an insightful way to think about this. And I keep coming back to your democratization of this type of stuff. And I think that really resonates with me in how we could do it. So
yeah, this is what happens when you talk to a lot of UX researchers.
But UX researchers are great researchers.
They are. Yeah.
But I want to leverage what Marco said as well. I do remember so many times getting emails from salespeople saying, I read this news about, the industry or a competitor or something. What should I do with that? What should I think, or how should I leverage this? And that, combined with the number of calls I got from people around the organization who would simply ask me a question. And I realized if that person didn't know the answer, then pretty much nobody had an answer. And so I actually started blogging a long time ago, long before it was called blogging, and was communicating to the sales force and anyone else who wanted to subscribe, here's some news and here's how you can use it, or here's how to think about it, so that they weren't surprised. If only, a client says, well, hey, company X announced this thing, how does that impact you guys? And they'd say, you know what, I read something about that really recently. Hang on, let me go search. And they would just print off this, internal confidential document, which I intended them to print off. And likewise with Q&A. I mean, I started developing frequently asked questions based on the fact that if one person asked it, probably nobody knew the answer. And I think that is kind of an effective use of product management, curating content from everywhere and just saying, here's how it impacts us at this company. As contrasting that with one of the newsletters I get every day, it lists all this news. So-and-so invested in so-and-so. Somebody else bought somebody else. AI did this wonderful thing, but with no commentary. I don't know what to do with the information. It's just noise.
Yeah. And it goes back to, I think, even some of those secondary research. Some of those insights are coming from secondary research. Knowing what's happening in a regulation or with consolidation in the industry are helpful things to do. So great conversation on listening posts. We actually went to the poll, and actually let me make it bigger. Which internal listening posts do you find the most valuable? The options were customer support, customer success. And I separate the two because one is, right, the support desk who's getting the call. Customer support is what I used to call an account manager, right? The farmer who's trying to manage it and make sure that we're doing everything for them and taking care of it. That's how I separate them. Sales, professional services, and other, it depends. And customer support, not really a surprise to me, came in as the leader, 43% of the votes, customer success at 18%, then professional services at 12%, and other at 25%. Steve, did you vote? And if so, how?
I did, and I voted for customer support.
All right.
I love those guys.
I do too. And they actually, we've said this before, I think they make great future product managers. I think are good with that. May, how about yourself?
I am always a customer support person. All of those people are amazing to work with. Services particularly give you an interesting insight into how people are using your products. But in terms of just well-rounded information, I find customer support's the best place. Customer success is an interesting one because it depends who gets customer success in your company.
If it's sales.
So for us, it's like giant national accounts. It's accounts that are struggling. So those two paint a very different picture from like 80-90% of our generic client base. So I think it's important to listen to customer success, but it's also important to kind of realize you can't use them as a full picture. The thing about professional services is it's what kind of company you work in. So if you're doing a lot of reverse churn where you upsell constantly and all of your services are with existing customers, and that's different. But if it's all new customers, you don't have kind of like the long-term pains of using it. So it's a very different set of input. And more so, I would say, like, having worked in product marketing, professional services is a great way to learn what's wrong with your go-to-market process. Customer support is a great way to learn about what's wrong with product.
I like that's a nice a way to look at it. I think customer success also depends on what is the culture for customer success. I've seen some customer success teams which are just sales with with an installed base versus some that are really sort of, we're like gold plated or black card customer support. We're here to really help you solve. So if it's really about upsell in, retention and more salesy, maybe they're not as good because you're getting that same type of feedback. If they're really about, white glove service and making sure everything's happening, the cause and effect, I guess, would be the case. It would be different. You sort of went to Marco's answer of all of the above. So Marco, now, I know English is not your primary language. Most is one, right?
I mean, actually, I would say all of them, right? So literally, because I see every single one of these contributors important in various steps of the product lifecycle.
Different lenses and different. I love that. So it depends. Yeah.
I mean, but that's also why I mentioned the pirate metrics, right? The R metrics, because you have the acquisition, and that's still the salespeople. You have the activation, that's going to be possibly customer support, customer success, maybe a little bit of professional services. You've got retention, again, that's customer support. You got revenue, that's customer success and sales, and then you have referrals, which could be, again, professional services, could be customer support or customer success, or also sales, or even the customers as your listening post. So they're all involved depending where you are with the product. And they're all important in that respect.
Wow. If I could vote for all of the above, because I said most, I didn't. I love your answer, Marco. I think it's really good. And trying to be a contrarian, this week I wasn't trying to win the vote. I was trying to be a contrarian because I knew customer support or customer success was going to get most of the votes. I went with professional services, and May, you sort of alluded to it in your conversation. The way I used when I was in my first role in product management, director of product management, the way our company was they were I guess it's not the canary in the coal mine. They were the ice at the edge, right? The customers who were pushing for new, different ways to get value out of our content, we didn't have on our product. They all started as professional services engagements, right? We would build a custom portal with our content, or we would integrate our content into a workflow. And so I was responsible for the services, productization of the services, enterprise solutions, we called it. And I was responsible for a set of products. And so for me, professional services, I wanted to find out what they were doing they thought was interesting and unique, because in this one span at one company, we turned 3 ideas into products, right? 1 was through acquisition, but 2 were through, stuff we sort of did as a services one-off. Call it the Accenture model, right? Accenture's really good at going out there and finding the same problem and fixing it. And eventually, instead of making it a services thing, they've built a tool for it, right, that they can sell. And so for me, I wanted to have that voice sort of talking to the value of that. And you said it directly, what type of professional services you're doing. And ours tended to be, in many cases, it was existing customers, but existing customers who were in that bell curve, the innovator people who were trying to figure it out on their own, and they needed our help to do stuff with our tools and content to enable them to do it. So I wanted to make sure we got that voice out there. But May, you brought that in. Any last thoughts on the poll, Steve?
Well, I want to fervently agree with the professional services feedback with a story.
No, a story, Steve. You never tell stories.
My professional services team at a startup I worked in was doing customization. And one day, one of the professional services people came to me and said, Steve, we've got an enhancement request here. And I'm like, okay, go ahead. What do you got? And they're like, could you get the damn GUI out of our way? It's all happy and only like 3 things on a screen and lots of error checking. And it takes us forever to do this work. And secondly, because the work that we're doing touches so many parts of the computer network, that we have to be in a secured area to do the work. And what happens when we're in that secured area is everybody and their brother comes over and says, hey, show me what you're doing. Teach me what you're doing, or teach me your product. And we're like, I'm doing actual work here, and they're trying to pull me into non-work, right? So I sat down with my dev team and said, so here's this problem. How do you solve it? And they said, you know what? We could do this whole thing in a 4-column spreadsheet, and they could save a CSV to a memory stick and just bring it in and load it into the database. And if they blow the database, that's their fault. And I went back to professional services and said, will this work? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes. And so 2 things happened. One is our implementations went down from 4 weeks to 4 days.
Wow.
And all that customization stuff they had been doing, with this 4-column spreadsheet, they were able to build a library of all these customizations. So they became now configurations. And we were able to say, well, which of the following do you need? Just tick them off. And every time they hit a little tick mark, it's like, okay, that's 1,000, that's another 1,000, that's another 1,000. And all it took us was bulk loading this into the database. And the clients didn't care. They didn't know how many hours it took to build. And the professional services people loved it, because I suspect that they were like working in the late evenings while watching TV into the early morning, because what the hell else am I going to do? I'm at a residence inn, you know? But it was just kind of a brilliant thing, that just this one idea from professional services of, we are power users, please get the amateur users interface out of our way. Became a whole new direction for the company.
I love the story. It took me in tangents from teach me how to, in my head went Dougie, and then how do you solve a problem, like in my head said Maria. But you know, sometimes we need that listening pose is important, because, you know, boy, if you can take a implementation from 4 weeks down to 4 days, that changes your pricing and actually may give you access to larger market segments, right?
A lot of good came from that one conversation.
So I appreciate you backing me up on my contrarian and making me not so contrarian. But what a good conversation on that. We're going to do one question before our lightning round. What are the biggest challenges product management faces in getting market insight? When Steve and I opened this up, we talked about a lot of the companies we talk about complain about, you know, it's tough to get whatever, right? This is an important conversation to help people understand where and how they could do it. But what are the biggest challenges in doing that? I'm going to start with you, May.
Depends on your market. Is it a B2B market or B2C market?
Okay.
A lot of my experiences in B2B and B2E. So it's getting access to customers, especially if the sellers are different. Sorry, the buyers are different from the users.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's often the case when it comes to B2E. And so talking to buyers will get you a different set of insights, but those are usually the people you have access to. And then the people you have access to through support or success might be power users, but often you end up talking to the manager of the people who are your users. So I think when you talk about getting direct market insights from users, the biggest challenge is access. Everything else, it's just like getting internal insight from other teams. Everyone just has a huge day job. Maybe they're understaffed, especially support. So trying to get support to say, hey, support, what were the 3 biggest problems you've seen this week? Like getting an answer to that was difficult, and it still is difficult because they don't have time to, ask their people, what are you seeing?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you feed that back to the PMs? So
I would tend to agree. I was teaching a class once, and we were talking about this concept, and this one lady raised her hand, and she said, let me tell you my tip. I work for a med tech company. Our software is used by the doctor's offices, and mostly the front office, right? And that type of stuff. He goes, so I tell everybody, my family, my neighbors, my friends, if anybody needs a ride to the doctor's office, I'll give it to them. Because while they were in at the appointment, she would start talking with
reception,
the reception, and she could do her market insight calls that way. But not everybody is so lucky to have that type of access, although B2C makes it a little more easy to, because we're all consumers at some line, but B2B can get tough. And that's one place where actually trade shows can come in handy. But I agree, getting access to people, and that's what we hear a lot. And part of it's, the roadblocks put up by some organization called sales, because they don't want them talking to people. Marco, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you need to know what the market is. And very often that's not the case. Very often, and I see this in pretty much all organizations I've worked in, you don't know what you don't know. And just finding out, first of all, who plays in the market, who do we need to look at, what are the trends, how is the market developing, changing, and so forth, is tough to grasp. So you do often need support. The other thing, and I totally agree with May, is access. And very often account executives are highly protective of their customers because, frankly, that's their currency, right? That kind of knowledge. So they guard it with their lives. And I think another one of these jobs that start to accumulate to a 16-hour product management day is you need to learn a certain amount of diplomacy and trading and stuff. So you get these account executives on your side, and you actually get them to pull you into customer conversations, and you get this insight. This actually, talking about stories, I've had a story about this as well in my previous job right at the beginning in the automotive industry, where one customer was complaining about, this was 3D cities, visualizations, and they were talking about muddy colors of buildings, and nobody understood what they meant. And the sales executives had no idea, and this was spinning around for 6 months until they pulled me into these meetings, which was unprecedented, bringing the product manager into a pure sales customer kind of conversation. And when they showed it to me, it became very obvious that they literally, in the 3D visualization, forgot to turn on the light. So the muddy color was the backside of the building that wasn't lit. And that kind of thing, from that point on, they kept pulling me into these customer meetings, sometimes more often than I would have liked, because they knew if I go in there, number one, it's more likely they find the problems. Number two, it was a lot easier for them to commit to something because it was the product manager making the commitment. Mm-hmm. At that point, they pulled their head out of the sling, and they could basically go back to me and say, hey, you were there. You promised the customer this and this and this. So this was the stuff they got out of it. So in the end, it was literally a win-win situation, and it worked out marvelously for everyone.
Awesome. I love that. Steve, any thoughts before we head the lightning round on challenges?
Well, I think I'll just agree with Marco and May. Access seems to be the big deal. Although I will say, it's so funny to me. I talk to B2C people and they say, oh, it's so much easier for you people in B2B. And then I talk to B2B people and they go, it's so much easier for you people in B2C. It's really quite amazing. But I have found in my career, both B2B and B2C, that having a conversation with a product manager is kind of a big deal. So if we can make the connection and say, I'd like to interview you, or, whatever, I cannot think of a time when I have had the client say, no, we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Only problems I've had have been internal political problems.
Just to say how we got around that, we started with the different internal sectors of where I work. We started doing advisory boards, but with the added caveat that if you are a member of the advisory board, you must give us at least 3 hours a month. So across all the different sectors, we've got, at least 100 hours of people.
Steve's writing that one down, May.
So we want to listen to you, but we really want to listen to you. And it's actually working out marvelously.
Awesome. I love that idea. And I think Steve is going to make it into Steve's courseware.
I believe that will be in a course tomorrow. Yes.
All right. We'll get to our lightning round. Why is having strong listening posts to gain market insight so important? One word or phrase. Marco.
Product managers are not all knowing.
Not all knowing. I love that. May.
Trust. People trust you because you're listening.
Trust. Not all knowing. We're not all knowing. Product managers are, and people will trust us because we have that insight. Steve.
If we have the data, then let's look at the data. If all we have is opinions, let's go with mine.
James Barksdale. So it's basically the antidote to Hippo. Right?
Yes.
I love it. And my answer, and this becomes my answer for a lot of things, because if we have strong listening posts and good market insight, we are making better decisions and we are focusing on the right things, which means we're going to have more success in the market. That's not a phrase. I know that was multiple phrases put together. But I think to me, that's that's what we're looking at. That's what we need. And what a great conversation. I appreciate everybody with their time this week and a great conversation. As always, I'm learning stuff. Steve's writing stuff down. I think there are a couple times we've taken notes that are going to work it into some of our consulting and advisory and stuff work. So thanks, Marco and May, for doing that. And we do this every week, right? We have these calls on Monday. We put the question in the community. On Wednesday, we do the poll. On Fridays, we have these great conversations, and Steve and I learn, and we all learn, and we thank you guys very much. So Marco, May, Steve, thank you very much. And we'll see you next week in the community.